Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very, very much for joining us on this roundtable on truth and reconciliation and museums. I want to thank you very, very much for participating in the roundtable. I'm going to start with some housekeeping, even though I know that all of you are Zoom experts now and Zoom savvy. At the bottom of your screen is a Q&A function. Please use it to just post your questions in there. And during our question and answer section of the roundtable, we will answer as many of the questions as we can. Please know that this roundtable is being recorded, and you will have access to it, to review it, and to use it once we post it on the museum's website, and that will be in a few days. So we are recording the roundtable. So thank you very much. And next. As I said, welcome. Thank you, Miigwech. The board of directors, management, staff, and the community want to acknowledge that the Bytown Museum is on the unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And we want to thank the Algonquin peoples for allowing the museum to serve our community on their traditional lands. So thank you. Museums and galleries and science centers, all the cultural organizations are facing incredible challenges. And it's not just because of COVID, although COVID has certainly highlighted them. It is because our society needs are changing, and we are recognizing gaps in our social infrastructure and social fabric. There'll be exciting but demanding challenge and an opportunity to rethink how we serve our communities as we take into consideration truth and reconciliation, diversity and inclusion, new technologies, the new requirements of our communities, as well as our youth and seniors. Truth and reconciliation in museums requires immediate action. However, it also requires ongoing, lifelong action and must be an integral part of our personal thinking as well as our professional actions. Next. I do want to thank our sponsor. Hybrid Construction Group Limited is a family-owned and operated construction business since 1987, and it is located in the Kingston area, although it does a great deal of construction work here in Ottawa. Without hesitation, they offered to sponsor the roundtable, but also our Zoom lecture series going into next year. What is important here is that our sponsor is community-based, not only in building the infrastructure of their community, but they are extremely supportive of their community's culture and cultural events and cultural heritage. So please join me in thanking Hybrid Construction for being our sponsor for the roundtable and our Zoom lecture series. Thank you. Next. I can't say this with enough respect and enthusiasm. I have the honor and pleasure of introducing you to our panel of esteemed colleagues. Chief Wendy Jocko of the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation, which is near Golden Lake in Ontario. Chief Wendy served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 23, going on 24 years, and did 2 active tours of duty in Bosnia and Croatia and served across Canada. Chief Wendy also studied in Scotland and worked in Scotland. And apart from being a certified funeral director, she is a licensed operator of transport trucks, which I think is really quite cool myself. Going back to Chief Wendy's military service, she has been honored with being the Veterans Eagle Staff Carrier since 1997. She started her political career in 2001, being elected as councillor at Pikwakanagan, and is now chief. Anita Tenasco, I want to personally thank Anita. She has worked with the museum and my team and myself for many years now on various projects. Anita is the Director of Education at Kitigan, Zibi, Anishnabeg, which is near Maniwaki in Quebec. Anita has served her community for over 26 years in various capacities. And the Cultural Center is one of the programs in her area of responsibility, and which, in her own words, is near and dear to her heart, the way it serves her community. Anita is a firm believer that the First Nations should control the education for the First Nations, as well as language revitalization and cultural survival and stability is very important for the Algonquin nation. Thank you, Anita. Councillor Merv Sarazin, also of Pikwakanagan, is a college graduate in business administration and HR management, and has over 32 years of senior management experience. But he is also a traditional person, being a hunter, a gatherer, a fisherman, and a trapper. He was elected as councillor in March of 2020, and his portfolio deals with education, culture, archaeology, and economic development for his community. Sylvia Moran, again, a personal thank you to Sylvia, who has also worked with the Bytown Museum for a number of years, is the Cultural Center Coordinator at Kitigan Zibi. Sylvia has a BA in Art History and is a graduate of the RBC Indigenous Internship Program at the Canadian Museum of History. She is an experienced and expert tour guide, curator, and archivist, and is cultural liaison with organizations who want to cooperate with Kitigan Zibi on projects. So please join me with a big round of applause for our speakers. Next. So without further ado, Chief Wendy, the Zoom floor is yours.
Well, miigwech, Robin, for that introduction. And on behalf of the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation, miigwech, thank you, merci for the invitation here this evening. So, as you know, museums have certainly come a long way since 530 BCE. Did a little bit of research about museums. And at a time when only wealthy individuals, families, or institutions of art were able to display rare or curious natural objects or artifacts in what there at the time was known as wonder rooms or curiosity cabinets. There was a time when even human subjects were on display for the rich. And this actually happened right up until 1970. Because I remember to the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto, where people were on display in what was known as the Midway. I don't know if anybody's as old as me, and if you were around in 1970, but I certainly recall that period of time. There was also a recent documentary made by The Nature of Things in 2016, and it was titled Trapped in a Human Zoo. And this documentary actually solved the disappearance of a small group of Inuit people from Labrador in the 1800s. And it tells the story of how indigenous people wound up in Europe on display. And it's estimated that over 35,000 Indigenous people from all over the world ended up in these human zoos, which is quite disturbing. And the moral and the ethical ramifications of these practices continue to be debated today.
Next.
So, yes. Museums help in preserving the histories of society. Various exhibitions tell us stories about how nations, communities, and cultures came to be, and without them, really, those stories could be forgotten. With careful documentation and artifact preservation, a culture can be recorded and remembered. It can be shared and understood by those from different cultural backgrounds. I remember it was in 1985, maybe 87, I was at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, and I was able to see the exhibit of Tutankhamun from Egypt. So that was quite an exciting exhibition. So some heritage organizations have done amazing work with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities. This has not yet become the norm across Canada. I do recall visiting a small museum in Saskatchewan while I was visiting some of my family members there a couple of years ago. And I was saddened to go into their local museum, and on display there was artifacts inserted in the First Nation exhibit in a way really that belittled and dehumanized the work of First Nation people. And sadly, this is not a one-time occurrence. Canadian museums of all shapes and sizes had a poor track record in their collaboration with Indigenous people in the past. Curators have spoken out about being told to limit the content of missing and murdered Indigenous women, downplay the role of child services, and avoid using the term genocide. This is one example of failure to tell the complete truth. Indigenous voices, historical record. Museums have an ethical responsibility to foster national reconciliation and not simply tell one party's version of the past. Artifacts need to be described in a way that is respectful to Indigenous people, in addition to having a right to access material created by and written without unnecessary barriers. The effects of collecting on Indigenous people can be devastating. The removal of sacred items not only causes a shortage of necessary ceremonial objects, but belittles Indigenous religion. The lack of respect in handling or removing sacred objects may, in some cases, result in a spiritual crisis for some people. Museum ownership issues are complex and very often one-sided, which reinforces concerns regarding a lack of respect for Indigenous values. And I did read years ago about the Six Nations of the Iroquois trying for 90 years to regain possession of many sacred wampum beads that were stored in a museum in New York, and I'm not sure if they were ever successful in their return.
Next.
This problematic relationship and mismanagement of historical information and descriptions began with the work of anthropologists, biologists, and natural scientists over 150 years ago. These specialists gathered vast collections of minerals, plants, animals, and Indigenous cultural items with the intent of studying, comparing, displaying and storing them. To promote a cultural hierarchy that erroneously placed Europeans and their descendants at the top of cultural achievement. Items were largely displayed in curiosity cabinets, as I mentioned earlier, which served to strengthen and reinforce Western domination over Indigenous culture. A friend of mine recently told me a story of an anthropologist by the name of Alice Hardlicka. Don't know if you've heard of him. So he was the first who documented the theory of human colonization. He claimed that Indians migrated across the Bering Strait from Asia. Alice Hardlicka founded and became the first curator of the Smithsonian Institution, National Museum of Natural History in 1903. And between 1936 and 1938, her 50 mummies from caves on Cagamel Island, which is near West Alaska. And it is said that he plied the local inhabitants with alcohol and robbed the graves while they slept. Hardlicka's methods came under scrutiny and criticism regarding his treatment of North American native remains when he was excavating while he was studying the Yaqui Indians.
1 minute.
Removing 1 minute.
1 minute, Wendy.
10 minutes rolls along. Oh my
Yes.
gosh.
Sorry, Wendy.
Skip right down to the end. So revisiting best practices and the creation of guidelines for archives at a national level would be a huge step forward in the heritage field. I believe there's a better understanding of how heritage organizations and museums of the future can strive to a more interactive and reflective of people and land around. There are opportunities to meet Indigenous people firsthand, rather than displaying and peering at poorly labeled artifacts through glass. Miigwech. Sorry, I was going to take more than 10 minutes.
Oh, it's great. No, thank you very much for your insight into the history of museum work, and also bringing to the forefront that we need new practices and guidelines and to be working in collaboration with the First Nations. So thank you very much, Chief Wendy. Next, Anita. The Zoom floor is yours for the next 10 minutes.
Pikwakanagan, Anita Tenasco, Indigenous, Kitigan, Zibi, Ndonjiba, Kichimigwech, Kibijayeg, Ondeje, Nungum. Thank you for the land acknowledgement by the Bytown Museum. Land acknowledgements must be meaningful and bring about real changes for the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation and all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who live in our traditional unceded territory in and around the Ottawa area. My talk tonight is entitled Open the Museum Storage Rooms, Open Our Minds About Exhibits, because I believe, as the Director of Education for Kitigan Zibi and as a leader within our cultural center, I believe we need changes in the world of museums. The Kitigan Zibi community has had a cultural education center, a small display center, since the 1970s. Without formal training in writing curriculum or without formal training in museology, some of our community members dove right in and developed their capacity to create language and culture curriculum and cultural exhibits. I'm so proud of the work that they carried out. They reflected our Anishinaabe Algonquin culture, language, and history for our people. Our people knew that our objects were not cultural mementos or artifacts of research. Our people knew that we had to record, document, and revitalize our language and traditional knowledge for future generations. We did not need museums to do this work for us in the 1970s, and this is still the case. Museums and our nation and all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people need to collaborate in a bigger way. The relationships between First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people and museums have always been non-existent or somewhat strained. I must say that First Nations people never really felt totally welcome or comfortable in a wide variety of museums over the years. I firmly believe that all museums must acknowledge the colonial history and purpose of museums as a first step on the path to reconciliation. Collectors and museums have been collecting and storing our objects, our sacred items, human remains for hundreds of years now. We have to work together in a different way. Non-Indigenous curators must work differently with Indigenous curators and communities. Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people can breathe life and uniqueness into museums. I challenge museums and museology programs in the following ways. Hire Anishnabeg Algonquin people in the museums located in the Ottawa area. This is pressing. We need to see ourselves, we need to be represented in the museums in and around Ottawa and within our traditional territory. Commit to working with us on our own terms. Assist us in cultural survival. Help to reduce the ongoing harm to the Anishinaabe Algonquin culture and traditions, our history and our language. Acknowledge the land or traditional territory that your museums are situated on, and do not assume that you have the right to read out a land acknowledgement at your meetings or events if you have not developed and nurtured a positive relationship with the host nation or other nations. Build respectful relationships with us. Come to visit us in our communities when it is safe to do so. Listen to us. Listen to our traditional knowledge keepers, our stories, our experiences. Research and design must include Indigenous people in key roles. It is time we have a voice in projects, in displays, in museums. Do not detach Indigenous people from our art and objects. Open the storage rooms to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Reconsider authority and access. Shift how museums value interpretation. Our stories, our teachings from our elders and our knowledge keepers count. Understand that Indigenous peoples have different worldviews. There are many truths in our nations. Be flexible. Know that when a community or nation experiences a major occurrence or death in the community, the project, the museum's work, the initiatives, schedule must accommodate the needs of the community first and foremost. Please know that some Indigenous people do not identify as being Canadian. Some of us hold strongly that we do not belong to Canada or provinces. We are Anishinaabe. Move away from tokenism and engage more, engage better. Do not be afraid to ask questions. Grow your awareness of Indigenous communities, expand the number of people who you know in different nations, and build your comfort level.
Next.
Individuals employed in museums. Be aware that there is no one way or one approach that will work for all nations and museums. Support Indigenous employees when they are hired within museums. Often I hear stories from Indigenous museum employees that they feel very alone, that they don't feel supported. Offer paid internships. Open doors by offering unique opportunities for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Make every effort to utilize the resources of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation for the museums that are located in and around Ottawa. Develop a protocol for working with elders and community members. Our people deserve the utmost respect during face-to-face meetings or during online meetings or at conferences.
1 minute.
Convene an annual meeting with the host nation, with the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and work with us from the very start of projects. We want to be there from day one. When museums do reach out to an Indigenous community or nation, be aware that the nation or the community may have limited human resources, so that we do the best we can with the people we have when we can. Increase your communications and collaborations with us. Help us build on our successes. And don't reflect us as only in the past. We are still here. We are on our land. We want to work with museums, but we need you to reach out to us, to engage with us, to fund the work, to help us build capacity, and to allow the museums to be a place of discussion for current issues and current events within our nation, within all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. Our hopes and dreams may not match your timelines and budgets, but don't give up on us, and we won't give up on museums. Kichimigwech. Thank you.
Miigwech. Thank you very much, Anita. Very powerful messaging and very well articulated. Thank you very, very much. Next, Renee. Councillor Merv, the Zoom mic is yours.
Okay, thank you, Miigwech, Robin, for doing such a great job and hosting this roundtable tonight. And I'm happy to be here to shed some light on our Algonquin or Anishinaabe Algonquin collectivity, I suppose, both sides of the Ottawa River. I wanted to say hello, bonjour, Wabawangan and Dodem, Pikwakanagan and Donjaba. Dear friends, elders, youth, veterans, honored guests, Algonquin leaders, and representatives of the museums that have joined us tonight, Pajosh and Kikina, welcome. So this land we're upon is the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. The Anishinaabe Algonquin people have lived here for thousands and thousands of years on this unceded, unsurrendered territory, and we thank and honor the land. We acknowledge the enduring presence of all First Nations, Inuit, Métis people who call Anishinaabe Algonquin territory their home, along with other nations. We acknowledge all of the residential school children who never made it home, and all those whose lives were broken from attending various residential schools. I wanted to speak tonight about Pikwakanagan's basic history, and in doing so, I wanted to reference a bit of the pre-contact here. I guess being a bit of a history buff myself for all these years, I was always enthusiastic about the explorers that had come to our land and recorded and reported what they saw. And one of the oldest written explorers was Champlain. He arrived on the shores in 1603 in Tenasco, Quebec. And the first Algonquin, Anishinaabe Algonquin that he met there was Chief Tezuwut. We're very fortunate that we have a statue of Chief Tezuwut at the Museum of History. It's on the shores, and he's looking across at the statue of what was there, Champlain. They had a look at each other, but right now Champlain's non-existent because he's in a box, and they're planning that development across the bridge there. So, but those two individuals met in 1603 on the shores of Tenasco, Quebec, which when they looked at each other, Champlain, when he got off the ship, he looked at Tezuwut they couldn't speak either language. So one couldn't speak French, the other couldn't speak Anishinaabe Algonquin. And so, but they became friends. And what Champlain witnessed was basically a war among the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, and because there were no non-native people or white people or Europeans on the continent at that time. So Champlain reported all that stuff. And so he took interest in our in the way we were, and that we were a people that had a sophisticated culture and a governance system, and used materials from the natural world around them, and regarding he established a trade route with the Algonquins and neighboring nations. So what we were people of our way of life involved, like the Algonquins, and they still do, prepare hides for clothing. We made birchbark canoes, containers for cooking and food storage, and built homes for shelter. We also formed tools to make birchbark canoes, snowshoes, toboggans for transport. We made bows, arrows, snares, hooks, nets, and for trapping and hunting and fishing and defense, all out of the natural materials from the surrounding environment, with the exception of those materials that were traded from neighboring nations. And so Champlain observed all that. In fact, when he went back to Europe, to France, he created a second voyage here to further explore the Algonquin riches. And so he came back with the intention of settling in. And so when he did return, he went looking for Chief Tezwat, who we met on the shores. And when I say we had a sophisticated culture and governance system, back then, historically, we had a way of selecting leadership from a hereditary point of view, where the selections were made from great-grandfather to grandfather to father to son and grandson, and all on the way through. So it's hereditary in that sense. And he recorded that when he started looking for Tezwat, he found him again up in present-day Pembroke. They call it Tezwat Island or Morrison Island. And there was a discovery of artifacts there in the area of around 6,000 years old. They found all these things, fish hooks and everything, and that's in the Museum of History, along with the archaeological reports that they prepared from those digs up there. But in 2000, with my involvement on the Powell Committee, we tried to establish a way of understanding who we are and where we're going. So we asked the former chief, then Kirby Whiteduck, to do a summary of Chief Tezwat. And so, being a scholar, he came from university, York University, and he came to me with all the, when I asked him, I said, do a summary on Chief Tezwat, because you wrote about him, you learned lots about him in your studies. So he came back to me, he gave me a stack of papers like 2 feet high, and I said, well, I don't have time to read that. I got 2 months to put this together to make sure our Powell Committee understands who Chief Tezwat is, and then to try to summarize his 6-page document what he wrote. He just summarized it into 2 lines describing Tezwat and his relationship with the Algonquin people. And he wrote, to summarize, he thought I was asking something out of unusual, was honoring the spirit of Chief Tezwat. And he wrote, summarized a 6-pager talking about this relationship with Champlain. And he said, here's what he wrote. He said, Chief Tezwat was one of the last hereditary Algonquin chiefs who reigned from at least the late 1500s to the mid 1600s in the Ottawa Valley. He was deeply concerned that if all Algonquin converted to the Jesuit religion, then the Algonquin would lose their traditional territory, their identity, their culture, and heritage. Chief Tezwat and the Kitchissipparini Algonquin strongly resisted the disintegration, influences of Christianity, war, disease. The resistance to Christianity was a fight against social and cultural disintegration and decay. So that was quite interesting that he summarized that after that short time period. But we promoted it in our powwow. We made T-shirts of it. We really promoted that relationship. And fast forward from 2000 to present day, our leaders understand who Tezewot is. He wasn't just known to the Pikwakanagan, but he was known to all of the Algonquin Anishinaabe in our territory. And I found that by traveling in the north to Val-d'Or area, that he was known over there as well, in the north side of Algonquin territory. But anyways, I wanted to share that. But when we talk about fast forward, we're up into how the reserve was created in Pikwakanagan, and in 1873, there were many petitions that went on for 150 years, and then 1,745 acre reserve was created in the Ottawa Valley in present day, which is near Golden Lake, Golden Lake, and here's what we found, that we are a small reserve. We have a certificate of possessions. Not many reserves that have larger treaties have certificate of possessions, but larger blocks of land. But at the same time, our land around us was given away over time after settlement, and we have there was our land around us was being given by free grants to non-native settlers by the government of Ontario, but also it was illegal for us to it was legal for us as First Nations to get these free land grants. It seemed clear that the government of Ontario didn't want us close to Algonquin Park, which had been established on our lands in 1893.
Sorry,
no
Councillor, one more minute, sir.
Okay, although our traditional activities were outlawed, or we were dispossessed from our lands within the boundaries of Algonquin Park, and we continue with our trapping and hunting and gathering and fishing. That's our way of life. And so First Nations, our First Nation in particular, weren't allowed to vote until about 1960. So, and even if we had college or university education, our Indian status was revoked as well. But historically, we all fought. Algonquins were always involved in all the wars that went on in the world, and we do have a long history of that. And I think Chief Wendy is a live, living person who's carries on that Algonquin tradition of being a warrior. And I want to leave it at that. Miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you, Councillor. And I know that during the Q&A section of the roundtable, a number of your points will be revisited, and you can expand on many of your points, all the speakers. Next. Sylvia Moran, the Zoom floor is yours, Sylvia.
Pikwakanagan, Sylvia Moran, Anishinabeg, Kitigan, Zibi, and Donjaba, Nindamta, Kitigan, Zibi, Anishnabeg, Pimajawa, Winnagamik. I'm Sylvia, I'm from KZ. I work at the Cultural Center as the Cultural Center Coordinator. I wear many hats for one person. I'm the archivist, cataloger, curator, conservator, administrator, marketing, event meeting planner, tour guide, programmer, cultural go-between for organizations, and artists, dancers, drummers, translators, and gift shop clerk. So we have the Cultural Center from 2005 to today. Below is the Cultural Center that was created in 1978 to 2005. It shared its space with the community radio station CKWE. From these humble beginnings began the foundation of our collection and telling of our own story. Our collections included, at that time, artifacts, photographs. They collected stories and history from elders, transferred Algonquin language into a dictionary, created educational language curriculum that's used in the school, cultural workshops, and the old photo calendar. The Cultural Center today keeps its legacy going, also adding increased tours, meetings, brought it into the digital world using new technology, social media, apps, official database, and digitized collections. A lot of cultural centers are small with limited budgets, with only 1 to 2 employees to handle 10 different jobs in a day. We are happy organizations want our help and come to us. We will help, and we ask, how can you help us in return? So just a reminder, we have our work plus requests coming in from the city, from the community, and other organization requests. So everyone is urgent. What we have learned and experienced throughout the meetings with the different organizations or collaborating with them is treat our elders and knowledgeable people equally in recognition and payment as you would your expert. Just because ours don't have the certificates to back up their expertise doesn't mean they are less valuable. Sometimes your expert learned from ours. If you want Indigenous content or translation, involve the nearest recognized host First Nation and let them tell their story in their own words. But do not ask another nation to review and make revisions on another nation's story or words. And we always ask you to include our fellow Algonquin Nation, Pikwakanagan, in any consultation process. Be patient. Like when having elder consultations regarding exhibit text, labels, land acknowledgement, protocols need to be followed. Don't rush a decision. And it's not our own story through our own words and put our language, symbols, and culture into it. We will always want to review the final product before it goes into mainstream. Give us time to contact people, to organize and to answer your question. Like requests for ceremonies or translation, there's a process for both. Translations are not charged by the word. You cannot just simply plug in words together, add a verb, and poof, there's your sentence. It won't make sense. Try not to set short deadlines, like when looking for translation using scientific huge words, which we don't have in Anishinaabe. When it takes time to describe these words and make a sentence, and then the sentence becomes wickedly long, and then we are asked to cut it. No. Our fluent elders are few, unlike the translators of other languages. Come to us as soon as possible, even if you have the idea of a project. Be flexible, open-minded in your ideas, plans, and time. It is difficult when we are approached with an organization's concrete ideas with no flexibility to the exhibit, and our story is excluded. We've been working with Amherst Museum. Over the past year, they came to us and they began drafting their exhibit and wanted to include our history, and we still are working with them. The Ottawa Art Gallery contacted us in 2016 regarding their exhibit Will All Become Stories, the art history of Ottawa Gatineau. They met with the director and me and presented their ideas and exhibition plan. Then we all met with the elders and they presented their exhibit and ideas to them and wanted our story and our artists to be involved. They were flexible. We had many meetings to make sure we were all on the same page. It was a learning experience for all, and one elder loaned their own personal item for the exhibit. Lunches and snacks are always bring our community in and bring people closer together. For that project, we had 4 translators working on each section. I brought them the work to do at their homes. Some translations needed to be typed out, which I did. For the grand opening, we promoted it in our community flyers. The OAG paid for the bus and driver to bring the elders to the event and paid for their supper. We were happy to help, be included, and get to see part of the outcome. Another organization needed a death date of an artist. No one returned my calls about this. The deadline was closed. What else could I do? I went to the cemetery, found a grave marker, and gave them the information. Another organization needed translation, and I finally found one elder available who was so happy to do this, to have something to do, because they were stuck in the hospital and the TV was boring. They were doing other translation work too, so I brought them their work at the hospital. Catered food. Ask your group if they have dietary issues and allergies, because there's a cutoff point to change up a meal. If a group presents no allergies, I make sure the caterer adds on to the invoice a small percentage of the meal, snack and dessert to be vegan, gluten-free, nut-free, because on the day of the meeting or event, the organization is frantic because 5 out of the 20 participants have food allergies or restrictions. So I guess, well, slide 2 is the vision. Our vision for the Cultural Center was incorporating the past, showcasing the present, and revitalization for the future. The Cultural Center is a meeting and gathering space. Is it a place to learn and hone traditional skills, value, and language to educate the general public, conserve both the physical object as well as the historical and cultural identity of the artifact with its deep roots to the language. We also want to educate and share the Algonquin culture, history, and language through our exhibitions, kiosks, tours, and working with organizations to incorporate the use of Anishinaabe and Indigenous themes into their exhibits, workshops, and programming. We may not be an official museum, but we are equally valuable and intrinsic to the Kitigan, Zibi, and Anishnabeg. The Birchbark Basket seen in the picture is made of steel. It was created by Simon Brocape for the Albanon Park in Gatineau, Quebec. He incorporated our language, symbols, and culture into it. This site was developed because of the archaeological findings in the area there, and they collaborated with Kitigan, Zibi, and Ville de Gatineau. The unveiling was June 21st, 2016. The photo below is the University of Montreal and Museum of Massachusetts, who came to help us catalog and photograph our collections, get FileMaker Pro database going. Sometimes people think we operate like a Google search engine and plug in one word, here's all the info. Unfortunately, we're not that advanced. So they helped us, they helped us change exhibits by using different methods. It was a learning experience for all. The Canadian Museum of History and Canadian Conservation Institute helped with conservation, loaning equipment, training, and hosted a workshop within the community, and the community enjoyed it. It instilled trust. So slide 3. Here's a list of some of the organizations we worked with. We're also working with Bytown Museum. And there's a picture of where we can eat if we have a large group in the hallway of the Cultural Center. And the one below is the meeting space where we gather in a circle. That's about it,
Miigwech. Thank you very much, Sylvia. And I did have the honor of sitting at that table and being in that meeting room. So I want to thank both you and Anita for that honor. Next. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll all take a deep breath because those presentations were absolutely excellent and very informative and very, very insightful. And now it's your turn to ask questions of our amazing speakers and esteemed colleagues. So I'm going to open up the Q&A slide on my computer. And the first question is, do you have any recommendations as to how museum professionals can work to fix the narrative to reflect accurately and to help better educate museum visitors? Who would like to take a go at that one? I saw Anita. Would you like
Sure,
that
I
one,
can answer
Anita?
that. Yes, so we have many writers in our nation. We have poets in our nation. We have many post-secondary students who could carry out this work. All we need is the opportunity for our people, for our artists, our musicians, our crafters, our beadwork specialists, our writers. Reach out to us and we can get the work done. We have a lot to say and we have a lot to offer.
Excellent. Thank you, Anita. Another question from Christine is, I am keen on learning how we as settler parents can engage our children in this reconciliation journey with you as neighbors with KZA. I live in Gatineau. What suggestions do you have to help bridge our children and communities? Again, Anita, would you like to go with that one?
Sure. Our school system often has online exchanges with student groups. When it is safe to do so, we also have student exchanges in person. We also welcome student groups when it's not COVID at our cultural center. And we carry out programming for young children, students, post-secondary students. We want to share who we are as Anishinaabe Algonquin people, our histories, our ongoing connection to the land, our art, our music, our teachings. And we're honored when people take the time to learn about us, to engage with us, and to take what they've learned and share with others. We need Canadians to understand us better, to collaborate with us, and to respect the fact that we are still here on our land.
Thank you, Anita. Good points. Alexandra from the Ottawa Art Gallery. It's not a question, it's just a thank you. Thank you, Chief Wendy, Councillor Merv, Anita and Sylvia for the excellent presentation and very important messages. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A section. The next question is thoughts on the First Nations display at the Canadian Museum of History in Ottawa or in Gatineau. Anyone wanna say hi to that one? Oh, Chief Wendy is typing an answer. Okay. Would you just like to voice the answer, Chief Wendy?
Yeah, I was just typing and I actually haven't visited recently, so I can't say that I've actually ever seen it.
Excellent. Well, a next question is there any possibility of various First Nation museums joining with museums across Canada to reclaim our sacred objects from the collection of the Vatican, as they were one of the first to participate in the thefts? That's a very difficult question, but does anyone want to have a go at it? Anita?
Robin, I have a comment about the Canadian Museum of History. Our nation, certainly Kitigan Zibi, members of our community have voiced that the Grand Hall should represent our nation. We should see the Anishnabeg Algonquin nation at the forefront in the Grand Hall. At the moment that visitors enter the Canadian Museum of History, our nation as the host nation should be very, very present and clear to all.
Thank you, Anita.
And in regards to creating a museum or working with the Vatican or churches, I'm not certain how we would move forward in that area, but I do see the need for a museum in regards to Canada's Indian residential schools and our survivors and the horrific legacy of the Indian residential school system. This is important that people remember this, that we don't forget that this is why many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are struggling still today in this country. And we also need to represent the resiliency and the strength and the intelligence and the beauty and the creativity of our peoples. And if we can have a museum in Ottawa that would tell this story and specifically focus on this very difficult topic, I think it would be beneficial for all. It would help with our healing.
Thank you, Anita. And my comment, it isn't just the collection at the Vatican, it's the collection in museums around the world that need to be approached and worked with regard to repatriation. Repatriation is just an ongoing concern and issue, and it will take time and patience, but it needs to be done. Merv, hi, Councillor Merv, I see your hand. Sir, you're on mute, sir.
Oh, you was watching my lips go?
Yeah, yes, it reminds me of a joke, but that's a separate issue. Yes, Councillor Merv.
Yeah, I wanted to say a few words about the Museum of History and their collection and how they portray our people in Canada, First Nations people in Canada, and it's like the main hall is almost 100%. British Columbia totem poles, I suppose, just on space alone. It occupies, all of the space in there. It's beautifully well laid out for that, but it lacks Algonquin presence, Anishinaabe Algonquin presence in that hall is absent. And so I agree with Anita in her voicing of that very concern, but from past experiences working at the First Nation administration, I volunteered a bit of work on archaeology and also with Chief Wendy some years ago. And when we visited and met with the museum staff and curators, they showed us the human remains that they had in the lower level. And I did a little bit of a ceremony there, but I just really had an ill feeling when I entered that part of the museum and I saw all these, about 150 remains, all encased in wooden boxes, pulling out a drawer. It's one person. But it took a good collaboration among the Algonquin, Anishinaabe Algonquin First Nations, the 11 First Nations, to collaborate together to come up with a plan to remove those human remains and show some respect for them. And it was done through this arrangement. And those remains were taken to Kitigan, Zibi, where they look after those remains. They built a beautiful, cemetery for them. I've been there myself to look at it, and so they're cared for now. But to get them out of the museum was a real struggle, because it was it was embarrassing to say the least. But through discussions with the Museum of History, it was done with the Algonquin First Nations to do it right, and it's done right. And so that's one positive move on behalf of the museum. And the lower level also is hundreds of canoes that First Nations people built as well. And one of the ones that were on display at the very front of the museum no longer exists, but it was a very large birchbark canoe built by one of our members, Matt Bernard. It was built in the 1950s. And it was a bit disrespected because the natural beauty of the canoe was defaced by it resembling that of a Métis, a voyageur canoe. And so they put paper mache on the ends of the canoe. And one time I went in there, it was dangling off the ceiling, and it looked like, the cour de bois and the native people were paddling these guys around, the country that represented that image. But so we lobbied the museum to repatriate the Matt Bernard canoe. So one day we showed up there and we asked to look at it, and we found it in two pieces. I guess it fell off. It fell and broke in two. And then now they're willing to give it back to us in two pieces instead of one. And, it was really a remarkable, well-built canoe. But over time, since 1950 to present day, they didn't look after it very well. But now they're willing to give it back to us. But that's our effort, is to get it back. We have canoe builders. We're going to work on which is our former museum. That facility is going to be used to keep our canoe building alive. And then once our young people acquire those skills, our biggest project is to rebuild that Matt Bernard canoe and put it in a proper museum, which we were intending to build on our cultural grounds. And so we're at that stage now where we have to take what belongs to us. But it's unfortunate they come in, in disrepair. The states that some of these artifacts come back, or museum items that they want to get back, are not very well looked after. But I hate to say that, but it's when you go in the museum, it's beautiful display and all that, but there's some real horrifying things that went on there, right? So anyway, I just wanted to share that a little bit there, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merv. Very, very important points, and thank you very much for the history of the canoe. This question intrigues me, and so it's from an anonymous participant. What is the role of the media and journalists in reconciliation? Anybody want to take a go at that one, about the media and journalists and their role in reconciliation?
I believe that the media and journalists need to assist us in telling our story, our truths, as we see fit, in our languages, on the land, in our communities, in cities, within our traditional unceded territory, or wherever our people live. And our people have a lot to share with Canadians, with the world, and we're hoping that the media will do its job and treat us fairly and give us the airtime necessary and help us have a voice in a respectful way.
Excellent. Thank you, Anita. Does anyone else want to add to Anita's observation and very, very good points about the media and journalists? No. There's this question actually is a good question. Is there a best practice for approaching for assistance or collaboration? Chief Wendy, I saw you went off mute. Would you like to take that question? No, you're back on mute. Anybody want to take that question?
Sylvia raised some good points earlier in terms of reaching out to us early before anything is placed on paper in terms of a project proposal or a project design. Please contact the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation Tribal Council, contact Kitigan Zibi, contact Pikwakanagan. We have a wonderful relationship with our fellow community. We can communicate and get together to assist a project in moving forward in a good way.
Thank you. And I know that what you're saying is true, because you have been gracious in working with the Bytown Museum. This question is also interesting, and then I'll get to you, Sean. Do you ever feel tired of having to explain yourselves at events such as this? For example, having to explain why these museums are needed, and how do you overcome these feelings?
I'd like to share that I had a conversation with my showmiss, my grandfather, many, many years ago, because I've been working now for my community for about 26 years. And years ago, he shared with me that my work would be very important to our family, to our community, to our nation, and that I would have to work hard. And many of our peoples are working hard in our communities and in Ottawa and other areas of Canada and the world, and that we just can't get tired. We need to keep up the good fight, the exchanges, the dialogues, the education. Even though education in this country did not treat our people properly in the past, we're now tasked with educating Canadians about our histories.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you very, very much. That one is very similar to another one that you answered, and Sean is much work. Sean Tudor, who's on my board, much work in repatriation in Canada. Museums tend to be cultural objects and grave goods. However, there are large natural history collections in Canada and around the world. How and where do we as museums start the process for understanding what reconciliation and repatriation looks like for these types of objects? So not only the cultural objects are important with regard to reconciliation and consultation and repatriation, but also the natural history objects, and how can museums and science centers and art galleries work with the First Nations to tell a different story about the natural history of Canada? That's a big question, and that might take many moons to answer, but anybody want to give it a go?
I'll give a whirl at her.
Thank you, Councillor Merv.
Yeah, in my the work I've been doing for well over 30 years with our community is really trying to understand our own history in relations to the newcomer or the settler or the Canadian people today, and that thoroughly don't understand who we are and where we come from, and that we leave a big legacy behind, that we do have a great natural history. And I would point to our relationships and the best practices with the government of Canada now, with the PSPC, Public Service and Procurement Canada, who looks after a lot of the facilities in the Ottawa. They've approached us to get involved since the discovery of a projectile point at Parliament Hill. It was found in 2019, and the archaeologist that found the artifact that had called it a projectile point. And in fact, when we got involved, Kitigan, Zibi, Doug Ojik and I, we got on board with the PSPC and established a relationship with them through a memorandum of understanding and agreements to move our stories forward since this story came out in the Toronto Star. And we said, okay, well, we don't think it's really a projectile point, but just so that you know, we have resources that work with us from the National Capital Commission. An archaeologist has been working with us for 20 years. We'd like to hear their advisory and lead us to really examine what you found. And it turned out that he brought, his name was Ian Badgley. I have a lot of respect for him. And he's brought our story around, and we involved 4 other archaeologists that looked at that artifact, and they said, you know, it's not a projectile point. What it is it's a knife. It's a mokamon. It's been whittled down over time, and it's probably close to 4,000 years old. It's been at Parliament Hill, at the corner near the barracks. There's barracks there before they built Parliament Hill. And so it's the mokamon, the knife. The story had changed and corrected. And so now we're working with the PSPC on the reconstruction of Parliament Hill. And it's under construction for the next 10 years. So that we're going to be putting out panels talking about the discovery of the artifact and our history of our people. And we've also identified the need to identify our spirituality to the land, the natural lands, which is Wazo Rock is a good example. Upriver on Ottawa River, Wazo Rock is in its Algonquin name is Magizi Kishkabakan, which is a spiritual sacred place for the Algonquins. That Champlain and the Jesuits had discovered that as well. And so that particular site is a natural site, and it's managed by Joanne McCann McGill. And she'd come to us some 20 years ago to say, what all the, you know, I'd say the damage that the public has been making boating by that natural site. They've been spray painting over these 6,000-year-old pictographs, and I see some of the pictographs are on that Birchbark image that Sylvia had there. There's the canoes, there's a Thunderbird spirit in there. There's like things in that rock spiritual gathering place, which is a natural wonder. So we're helping that organization clean that site up, but it's going to become part of a panel at Parliament Hill. So we look at pre-contact, we look at contact, and we look at the future going ahead, how we're going to change the image of our, you know, of our people to one of a more positive one, which is more than it has right now. Because if you walked into Parliament Hill, you walked into the central area where the Peace Tower, you don't see much about Algonquin anything in there. That was one of my criticisms walking through it. I see lots of all the other stuff about colonialism and Statue of the Queen and the Kings, and you know, there's nothing in there really. So they're working with us now to really change our relations around to a more really positive one for the Anishinaabe Algonquin. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you, Councillor Merv.
Mhm.
Robin?
Yes, go ahead, Anita.
I would just like to speak a bit about repatriation, because
Thank
this
you.
is a huge challenge for the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Many of our communities are struggling with issues in housing, water, sewer, roads. They're struggling with properly funded schools and employment, mental health issues. So repatriation falls to the bottom of the list, if you will, in terms of priorities. But yet, reconnecting our peoples with our objects, our sacred items within museums across Canada, in the United States, or anywhere else in the world for that matter, is so important to our overall well-being. This is important to our elders, our educators, our youth, our traditional knowledge keepers, our artists. And yet, when a community such as Kitigan Zibi attempts to carry out repatriation, we're presented with obstacles, nothing but obstacles. First of all, we don't have museum status within our cultural center. Secondly, we don't have the appropriate cabinets or the appropriate air quality. Whatever the excuse may be, these are some of the obstacles that were presented. And it's very disheartening to our cultural center employees, our elders, our volunteers who are so interested in reconnecting with our objects in our communities, not only within visits at museums. So please help us tear down the walls and the policies, the protocols that prevent us from carrying out repatriation. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you, Anita, and you're spot on correct. And we need to all work together on the repatriation. And it isn't just the actual giving back, it is making sure that all of these bureaucratic obstacles are removed and that an honest and complete discussion is done in a respectful manner. So thank you, Anita. This is an interesting question. Do the presenters have any suggestions on how museums can best engage with off-reserve Indigenous peoples? There is often no obvious point of contact for urban Indigenous peoples other than friendship centers, which may not include all peoples. And as you know, Ottawa, it has the largest Inuit community south of northern Canada. So, so that question actually resonates for all museums on how to work with the urban Indigenous peoples, as well as with people at Kitigan, Zibi, and at Pikwakanagan. So anybody wanna have a go at that question?
I can
If-
speak on
Go ahead, Anita.
Okay, I can speak on behalf of Kitigan Zibi and Sylvia's work within the Cultural Center. I know Sylvia and the Cultural Center team make every effort to contact Anishinaabe Algonquin people, regardless of where they live, when there are opportunities for art or design or writing or printing or all sorts of initiatives that museums call for. We communicate via our weekly newsletter, and our newsletter is online within Kitigan Zibi's website. We communicate through our tribal council and the team there. We communicate through our contacts in Pikwakanagan. We communicate through good old Facebook. We do our best because our people are talented and welcome to participate in museum projects and cultural projects, even if they live away from their home communities. They are still part of our communities and nation.
Thank you, Anita, and that's a good point. This one is not a question, but I'm going to, this is from Maddie. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and knowledge with us today. So I concur with that. Thank you. People are agreeing with you, Anita and Merv. Yes, the Algonquins need to be front and center at the Great Hall, not for the museum organization or institution, but to respect our own First Nations. Many thank yous from many people. There was another question here and now I've lost it. Is there any progress on Truth and Reconciliation Call to Action 67? And I'm hoping they tell me what that is, which calls on the federal government to provide funding to the Canadian Museums Association to undertake in collaboration with Aboriginal peoples a national review of museum policies and best practices to determine the level of compliance and make recommendations. So that is a very large question, both in terms of length as well as complexity. Does anybody want to take a go at that one? Because the calls to action for museums there's a number of them in the Truth and Reconciliation report. Anita, I saw you.
Yes, I'd like to share and be honest that the TRC's 94 calls to action to date have not created concrete changes within our communities, within our cultural centers, for our people. Yes, those calls exist. They seem daunting, lengthy, sometimes hard to understand how they will be implemented. And honestly, we're not funded or supported to help assist in this work so that it's meaningful, that it reflects our worldviews, that it's respectful of our wishes, and that it will bring real change that is evident to our people, whether they're in Ottawa or they're in Montreal or Toronto, or they're in their communities within our nation. So yes, those calls exist, but where's our funding to do the work that we need to do, to talk to museums, to talk to researchers, to talk with post-secondary institutions? We're only approached when there's a budget provided for a project or a grant. But often when those funds are not there, the conversations are limited. We can do better. We can do more. And let's think creatively and get this work done.
Thank you, Anita. Does anybody else want to add to Anita's excellent comments? No? Councillor Merv?
I think Anita said it all.
All right, thank you.
Money matters.
Councillor. Yeah, yes. This one actually is a good question, and are the Anishinaabe communicating with the school board and other municipalities to educate the youth and community about the history of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, both the history and culture of the Anishinaabe? So I know you are, but would you like to go into more detail? And I know Anita, being the Director of Education, I know you're greatly involved with this.
Yes, I'm a proud graduate of the Kitigan Zibi High School. So I firmly believe in First Nations control of First Nations education. And I believe in indigenizing the curriculum within Quebec, Ontario, and all provinces across this country. All school boards need to do a better job, and it's urgent that our histories are told within the resources in elementary schools, high schools, colleges, and even within universities. We need to do more and do better quickly. And this is for the well-being of all Canadians. When our children and youth become more familiar with the Anishinaabe, Algonquin, and all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, we can then work together and collaborate, potentially as friends. And we can create positive change for all in the country. So yes, we are working with many school boards in Quebec. It is challenging due to language differences and or jurisdiction issues. We are working also with school boards in Ontario and post-secondary institutions in Ontario and in Ottawa. I do sit on Indigenous education councils with the University of Ottawa, Carleton University, Algonquin College, Heritage College, Cégep de l'Outaouais, and the list goes on. But I value the work because there are champions in these institutions who are showing me and showing our nation that they're trying, they're attempting to do more to include our story in Canada's history.
Thank you, Anita. And that was a good segue. I just lost it, but that's a good segue into this question. On the eve of the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, what is your hope for the next generation of Indigenous children and their relationship with Canada? Does anybody want to have a go at that one?
I'll take a crack at that.
Thank you, Councillor Merv.
Well, that's one of the places I'm going there once we're done here, is I've gone off to Parliament Hill, because there's a national Center for Truth and Reconciliation raising of the survivors flag at 100 Wellington on the eve of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. So they've invited Algonquin, Anishinaabe, Algonquin people there tonight, and for tomorrow's activities as well. But the Algonquin Nation, Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation Tribal Council, and other First Nations from Algonquin Nation Secretariat and Pikwakanagan worked hard to establish a central focal facility, a place for a gathering of and the rebuilding of our nation at 100 Wellington. Former Chief, Grand Chief Verna Polson did a great job in terms of establishing that presence at 100 Wellington, because we don't have one. We never had a central. Well, we did, but it was never recognized. And so that's going to be like Algonquin headquarters for our nation rebuilding. And temporarily, they have a 119 Spark Street as a place for us to gather now, because we always seem to be looking for a central place for us to gather and bringing our peoples together, all of our elders and our youth and our leaders, and to talk about our rebuilding our nation and rebuilding our relationship with Canada and in the province of Ontario and Quebec. So when lacking that central location, we're scattered and we're not together. It just seems like we're not together. The only time we get together is when something awful goes on in the country, and we have to collaborate and protest against Canadian policies, education. I've attended a lot of them over the years, rallying Parliament Hill, and you don't like the way the Canadian politics is going, so you got to rally. You got to look for ways that we can change things for the better. We don't always agree with politicians and where they're going with policies, and we've had this for centuries. Dealing with genocide is another word they don't like to talk about, and so we're trying to change this future for our children, for our children yet not yet born, and to do something today, not tomorrow. We need to honor those elders that traveled at those long distances, and our people that travel those long distances, because the nation, our nation, is not a small area. It's not like a little city of Ottawa or a culmination of the cities around it. Our nation is large. 9 million acres in Ontario, 9 million acres plus on Quebec. Add it all together, you got 11 First Nations. We're huge. We are huge. We're not stakeholders in our territory. We are actually the rightful owners. And so we're making that presence at 100 Wellington, starting tonight with the raising of the survivors flag. Hopefully many will join us, and we'll have a traditional drum there as well. Miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you, Councillor Merv. We're about to wrap up, but I want you to know there are a number of questions, and we're going to try to record them and try to answer them separately. But I also want our esteemed panelists to know that there are many, many thank yous for sharing your time and your wisdom and your insights into the issue of truth and reconciliation in museums. So miigwech. Now, only because does anybody have a minute each? Does anybody have any final comment or observation that you would like to make Does anybody want to say, have a final word on, I know your speaking notes, you probably could have gone on for an hour each, but does anybody have any other final comments?
Well, I do have one, and just to, you know, to recognize our veterans. I noticed that there's an absence from many museums for, especially in Algonquin territory, for Algonquin veterans, and, you know, across Canada as well. And as somebody mentioned Joanne McCann's name earlier, and I know that she's been very instrumental in trying to, you know, help us to put a veterans exhibit actually at Garrison Petawawa. And, you know, twice now we've applied for grants and twice we've been unsuccessful. So, you know, that's certainly a rather disappointing, especially when we're talking about, you know, the monies that get dispersed by the government, and where do they go to? You know, you keep applying for these grants and we're never successful. Same with our cultural center here in Pikwakanagan. We've tried at least 3 times, you know, to have a beautiful museum where, as Merv mentioned earlier, we could, you know, bring the Matt Bernard canoe home to. But, you know, we're seem to be going up the hill all the way. But anyways, it's been a real pleasure being here with everyone, and miigwech for the invitation.
Miigwech, thank you, Chief Wendy, and thank you for talking about our veterans. And indeed, the veterans of the First Nations, of the Algonquin, but all First Nations, they need to be honored and respected and acknowledged. So thank you for talking about them. Does anybody else have a final comment? Well, listen, I know that Anita has another meeting, and I know Councillor Merv is going to Parliament Hill. So I want to thank our speakers. Please join me in a huge round of applause and gratitude for Chief Wendy, Councillor Merv, for Anita, and for Sylvia for spending this time with us and sharing their knowledge and their wisdom and their insights with us. I also want to thank the participants who joined. We have 500 people who booked, and it's our colleagues, museum colleagues from across Canada and into the United States, university and college students and professors. We have government workers and people from all 3 levels of government, and we do have some politicians who have attended this round table. And I do want to also say tomorrow is Canada's first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Please, it's not just a stat holiday. It is a day to honor and to think about how we can all work with the First Nations in our communities and truly come to truth and reconciliation. I again want to thank our sponsor, Hybrid Construction, and thank you, miigwech. Please take good care of yourselves, stay safe, and be kind to each other. And we will address all of our social issues together. So stay safe, and thank you for attending. Miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech kakana. Thank you.
Thank you
Take
very
care,
much.
everyone.